I'm Brittany, this is Eddie, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, I am finally reviewing your Asian BL series recommendations. A few months ago, I made a post on the community tab asking for Asian BL series recommendations, and you guys threw 42 series at me for me to dive into, and I could not have appreciated them more. Up until then, I had seen part of one Asian BL series. It was a largely unexplored part of media for me. I had no idea what my tastes were, my preferences, obviously not faves because I hadn't seen any. I just didn't know anything. And boy, 42 recommendations will educate you. Now, I saved the top 9 most wrecked series for a separate video so that I could go a little bit more in depth with them. But today we are looking at the bulk. We are looking at the rest of them. We are looking at 33 Asian BL series. I will be ranking them from 1 star to 5 star, from worst to best, like you do. And here's a quick breakdown of what each amount of stars means from a reviewing standpoint. 1 star is the closest I come to calling something objectively bad. I obviously do not recommend this under basically any circumstances. 2 stars is a mix of this just isn't for me with I don't even think people who would normally like this kind of thing would get much out of it. Ultimately, I don't recommend. 3 stars means it's passable to good in some areas, but it's being held back by some other things that I didn't enjoy quite as much. It's probably not my thing, but if you look at the premise or the tropes involved and it's up your alley, you might get more out of it than I did. So it's ultimately recommended. 4 stars means I finished it and I pretty much greatly enjoyed myself. There may have been some flaws, but it didn't ultimately hold me back from having a good time. I would strongly recommend these shows, even if it involves things that aren't your usual preference. And of course, 5 stars is a new favorite. Fantastic, wonderful. I enjoyed pretty much every single moment. Any complaints I have are small and nitpicky and can be easily brushed aside, and I would recommend this to anyone who would listen to me. I would consider this required viewing. Okay, the first batch of reviews. We're going to start with the low end and end on a high note. So that we're not here all day, I'm going to put a list of all the shows that I ranked 1 to 2 stars up on your screen. The first thing I learned as I started watching these series was that I don't like the super fluffy, campy, sort of melodramatic comedy genre of BL series. If one guy trips into the other guy's arms and a K-pop song starts playing while everything goes blurry, I'm just personally not into that. I like fluff, just not to these levels. And to be fair, I don't like Hallmark movies for very similar reasons. It's simply not a style that I get much out of. And most of the shows on the 1 to 2 star list could be accurately described as gay Hallmark. But even for gay Hallmark, I felt like there were better options out there for fans of this genre than these particular shows. Better options, like these 4 shows, I gave 3 stars to. These shows still go under gay Hallmark, but for the most part, they had a bit more character or chemistry or storytelling going for them, especially Hello Stranger. I would recommend these series to people who are already fond of the genre, who might get even more out of it than I did, but I don't have anything in particular to say about these, so I've lumped them together. Now we're gonna get specific. Now we're getting into the stuff that I have particular opinions about. Starting with more 3 stars, these first 2 I had to give more of a trial run than anything else because they're big fantasy series like The Untamed. And if I had truly gotten into another fantasy series alongside The Untamed, my brain would have exploded. So these first 2 were more of a test run than anything else, so take my opinions with a nice big grain of salt. L.o.r.d. Critical World is a Chinese historical fantasy drama about a man who can command the elements, the young farmer boy who becomes his follower, disciple, kind of by chance, and their journeys as they move through a complicated political landscape through different countries that are based in different elements. Just wrangling together a somewhat clear premise was a cute trick, let me tell you, because this series is very plot heavy. But what I did see of it, it had more plot potential than anything else. Like there was a really cool world going on. There were a lot of moving parts to it, and I could see how this could develop into like really great storytelling from a purely plot standpoint. But other than that, there was an over reliance on some pretty bad CG. I wasn't really connecting with any of the many characters presented to me. I don't know, I just wasn't as instantly grabbed or hooked into the characters or the world like I was with the Untamed. And I realized the Untamed has probably spoiled me in more ways than one, but I can't help that. The ship at its center was right up my alley, like the stoic, cold warrior and like the innocent, young, happy farm boy thing. That was promising, especially for me. Love shit like that. But because I couldn't really find another way in, and if that was going to be the only thing going for me through a long series that's incredibly plot heavy, I'm just not sure if I'm going to revisit it. If you're really into world building and cool world concepts, like if that's a big reason why you love The Untamed is because you're fascinated by that world and how it works, this would be one that you gave a shot. Continuing with the 3-star series, and the other show that I could only dip a toe in so that, my brain didn't explode, is Handsome Siblings, a Chinese historical fantasy drama about two twins who are separated at birth but are supposed to kill each other. Like, they're destined to kill each other, they're told they're supposed to kill each other. That's where they are fated to end up. Now, despite never knowing each other and never having met each other, obviously, if the fact that they are related at all bothers you, this is not going to be a series that you watch. But as for the show itself, see, we're gonna go back to the Untamed problem, because yes, the Untamed has indeed spoiled me, and even though this show I found more engrossing than L.o.r.d. Critical World, I was drawn into it more. I was drawn into it long enough to, meet both of the main characters, to meet the main, ship of the series. I was more drawn into the world. The production was overall better, and all of these things, it had all of these things going for it, but it still wasn't at the level of the Untamed. And so by comparison, because I'm still literally watching The Untamed right now, I haven't finished it, it's really hard not to compare the two, and Handsome Siblings definitely pales in comparison. But if you're into The Untamed, this is probably the show that you should be giving a shot before anything else. It's in the ballpark without being a direct copy, and I feel like if I'm going to go back and revisit anything after I'm done with The Untamed to give it a second chance, it's probably going to be Handsome Siblings. Another 3-star show for me was a 2-episode series called To Wish. It's a contemporary slice of life from Thailand about 2 college graduates who are in a relationship. One is gainfully employed and the other one is jobless. I felt real seen with this show because the wife and I are in much a similar situation. And I had to work through a lot of the things that the jobless character in this series had to work through. I had a lot of the same anxieties. And the wife was extremely similar to the employed character in this series in that they were genuinely okay with supporting the other one. They weren't pressuring their partner at all. They were being wonderful. But the jobless one had a lot of issues happening. In that respect, I felt real connected to what was going on and their relationships and the problems that they were facing. I greatly appreciated seeing that dynamic play out in a fairly realistic, more or less well-done way. It's a cute little special. It's nice and short. And aside from a really cheap grab at drama there at the very end, it was enjoyable. It was nice. It wasn't the best executed thing on the planet. It had some wobbly stuff. I mean, that's why it's 3 stars. But I still greatly enjoyed it. If you're ever bored one night and you're in the mood for some contemporary domestic gayness, I mean, give this a shot. You might like it. Quarantine Things is a slice of life web series from the Philippines about roommates to lovers, but in the specifically quarantine setting. Out of the 3-star series in this video, I feel like this one has a little bit more of a leg up on the others. Like, it's weird. It occupies kind of 2 places at once, because sometimes when the show is really working, it's about these deep characters with deeply heartfelt emotions, with some solid character development, and each guy has their own things to figure out. But that can also slip into some weak acting and some melodrama and some really contrived behaviors. When it lands and when it's really operating at its best, it's something uniquely special and very engrossing and compelling, and you really get invested. But when it slips, the entire mirage just cracks, it just falls down. And it slips enough times that it's noticeable and it matters, and I can't really give this anything more than like a strong 3 out of 5, especially with the forced way they tried to pull off the ending. But it hits a couple of really sweet spots when it comes to tropes. Like, oh my god, they were roommates, and you have the introvert, sensitive one, and the jock, and then you have a whole bunch of gay panic. Like, it hits these certain tropes that are really good. And that alone makes me think that I might revisit it someday, even if there are definitely certain things that are holding it back. Okay, according to my list, it's time to talk about Advance Bravely. You will understand my frustration here in a second. This was a Chinese series based on a queer novel that was censored for television. First of all, get used to that sentence when talking about queer stuff from China, because the C in C drama stands for censored. Advance Bravely is a more macho, action-oriented story between a rich playboy type and a guy who trains bodyguards for a living. The trainer's sister is in love with the playboy, but when she gets her trainer brother to help her nab the playboy, you can see where this is going. And this started out so good. Right away, I was like, oh, 4 stars. This could easily turn into 5 though. Action gays, bodyguards, a love triangle that you know is gonna end queer and not hetero. Like, sign me the fuck up. And for the first half of this series, I was hyped as shit. I was so unbelievably happy. Like, yeah, were there some things about it that were a little bit over the top in kind of your token Chinese fashion? Yeah, but it was in all the ways. It was in all the ways that like catered to my tastes personally. It was very aimed at me in particular. And their chemistry was wonderful. It was just a gift from the queer gods. And then after the first half, the plot started to meander and meander. And pretty soon we didn't have much time left, and how exactly were they going to address the couple of big mysteries in this plot that they're still not addressing? And then the entire big climax of the end of the series was just so fucking ridiculous. And like the last scene of the series was basically insulting. I will bet you serious money that in post-production, they realized that they never actually answered one of the biggest mysteries. And so they animated, this is a live action show, they animated a scene that very quickly just magically explained the big question, and even the explanation didn't entirely make sense. And like I just mentioned, this was a live action show, and all of a sudden they're trying to insert some, frankly, really shitty animated scenes in there that still didn't wrap things up entirely. Like it was a mess. An unbelievable mess. And I am so heartbroken that this series, for the first half, was so quickly becoming one of my favorite things. Oh, all the different tropes at play, all the different great, like, moments between them. The sexual tension was off the chain. Both of the men were absolutely beautiful. The series had everything going for it. And then it slowly derailed before crashing in a fantastically bad explosion. I was so furious. And yet, the first half hit me so good that I still give this 3 stars. And I still say that if this sounds like it's up your alley, watch the first half. For the love of God, watch the first half. You will have so much fun watching the first half, but please, dear God, don't finish it. History, Crossing the Line, is a Taiwanese contemporary romance series. As I watched all these series, I took notes as to the premise so that I wouldn't have to later. And this is literally what I had written down for this series. A fist-fighting bottom reluctantly joins a volleyball team captained by a glasses jock. Do I have to say more? This series was a little bit less absurd than its, contemporary romantic comedy drama counterparts. Like if Gay Hallmark had an upper echelon, this series would be on it. I really appreciated the character trope inversions with the whole volleyball aspect. It was nice for the characters to have something to focus on other than relationships. And this is one of the few 3 stars that I may actually rewatch in the future, because the relationship and how they developed and the plot basically worked for me. Like, did it have some, hindrances? Yeah, of course. I gave it 3 stars. I wasn't really totally invested with the gay romantic subplot in this. It had to do with stepbrothers, and I just wasn't terribly invested, so there were parts that I was skimming. And even though it's in the upper echelon of the whole gay Hallmark thing, there are still aspects of that just aren't really my thing. But if you're a fan of the History series in general and you haven't watched this one yet, I would say that it is definitely one of the best from History that I have seen. Is it kind of cheesy? Is it kind of contrived? Yeah, but I enjoyed it, sure. Give it a shot. You may enjoy it more than I did. Long Time No See is a South Korean action drama about a hitman who also writes gay stories online and falls for a fan of his work. The tropes are alive in this show. There are a lot of things about just this concept that I am ready for. I am signed up. I am here. Yes, this is up several of my alleys. But especially in the beginning, this show had almost like an identity crisis. It wanted to be a really, really serious, dark hitman drama about this young man and his trauma and this life that he has been more or less, born or manipulated or like shoved into, and just really gritty in that respect. But then they also wanted to be like really capital R romance about his relationship with this fan, right? And so the gears didn't exactly shift all that well when they needed to, and it wound up feeling like all this really intensely dark subject matter fell flat and wasn't really being taken seriously, and we wound up in a really weird place. It was like 2 totally different genres in one project, but it wasn't finessed enough to actually make it work. The actors were great, especially in the second half, but their relationship wasn't really given much time to grow, and so as a result, the whole thing felt a little bit rushed between them. It's still a fun, albeit kind of weird time, with some really nice kissing and intimacy stuff happening that I find is apparently avoided a lot of the time in BL dramas. And if you're into genre queerness like I am, you should probably at least give this a shot one time. Also, the guy who plays the hitman is pretty fucking gorgeous. But really, if you gave this series some better direction and some more episodes to really flesh things out, there's a really good story here. It just stumbled over one too many things. And I'm back for day 2 of filming. Apparently, I was supposed to only take 1 day to film this, and then it needed 2. So here I am, doing 2, because apparently I can talk about Asian BL series for quite some time. And now we reach 4-star series. These are shows that have some pretty decent quality all around and come with a solid recommendation from me. There may be some things I can criticize or maybe have some differences with or issues with, but on the whole, you'd be pretty safe to check this out, even if it doesn't really sound like something that's immediately up your alley. Out of 33 series, there are only five shows that I gave 4 stars to, and that first one is Winter Begonia. Winter Begonia is a Chinese historical drama based on a queer novel and censored for television. The plot centers around a friendship that develops between a wealthy businessman and a very, very perfectionistic opera star. But there's still a lot of time dedicated to the supporting characters and the world around just the 2 main guys. It's all very richly realized and filmed, and the sets are incredible. The production levels on this show alone are some of the highest I've seen. Like, we're talking right up there with The Untamed, maybe even a little bit more, just because it's so based in realism. It's just all very highly professionally done. But it's also pretty slow paced. And the thing about slow pacing is that your mileage really varies. Even people who can generally really like something that's slow paced, everybody has a different opinion on what's slow paced and interesting, and slow paced and boring as all hell. Or maybe it's slow paced in a way that doesn't seem to quite hold your interest, but isn't the slowest paced thing you've ever seen. It's all a big spectrum in the pacing world. And for me, it did struggle to hold my interest. I like a nice slow pace like anybody else. There are plenty of films that I love that other people say are slow and boring as hell. So I'm not judging this show as if it's like universally boring or anything like that. It's almost like my opinion on the pacing doesn't really matter because there's no bearing on whether or not you're going to find it hard to get into like I did. If you like prestige dramas, right? If you like your stuff high quality and just super like Oscar bait type feel, if you like that, except you want it to be a bit more homosexual, this is for you. For me personally, while I appreciated all of the quality that was being thrown in my face and all of the excellent beginnings of a friendship, I felt my interest flagging way more often than not. And that's just what happened to me. May not happen to you. I can still recognize that it's still a very good show. That's why it's getting 4 stars. But it wasn't quite as engaging enough for me to keep going. However, I do recommend it, so that's weird. History, Right or Wrong, is a Taiwanese contemporary romance between a cynical professor and the young college student who winds up taking care of the professor's young daughter. And you would think, given the setup and given that the subtitle of this is Right or Wrong, that it would struggle with the more power imbalance-y issues, but it really doesn't. It's actually a lot more wholesome than that. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I mean, there was never an issue with anyone's autonomy or sense of personhood. No, none of those games were ever played. Nothing iffy or skeezy like ever takes place. It's not too over the top. It's pretty solid all the way around. I actually really enjoyed this story about kind of a new family forming. I mean, they did do that thing where one character catches the other and it's like, cue the cheesy music. They did do that one thing. But other than that, it's a more naturalized version of events than some other shows, even in the history series. I cared a bit more about the secondary characters than I usually do, like especially the student's best friend. She was amazing. I'm kind of low-key in love with that actress now. She's incredible. She is like the BFF that you always want. Looking out for him, supporting him. A+ best friend in this series. It even handled the more, sensitive, character-driven material quite well, and the development that each character goes through, both individually and together. They each have their own things that they're dealing with, and through their growing relationship and their growing understanding of each other, they each overcome their own things. I mean, overall, this was a pretty solid show. I mean, some of the comedy was a little nah, but I'm choosy with my comedy. And even though I did like some of the supporting people more than usual, it was still a lot of the times more like, okay, we can get to the stuff that we're really here for kind of vibe. But really, on the whole, this was pretty damn good. I would definitely recommend it. I mean, that's why I've given it 4 stars. His is the only movie on this list. I think there were 2 movies that were recommended, and this is the one that I really, really, really liked. This is a Japanese drama about a pair of exes who broke up after high school, and then many years later, one of them shows up on the other's doorstep with their daughter in tow. So much of this story centers on a queer person trying to retain custody of their kid. And of course, all of the hurdles and homophobia that they have to face in the system while just trying to be a parent to their child. And honestly, I got so wrapped up in this movie and what it had to say, even though from an American standpoint, it feels kind of old news, but for Japan, it's extremely relevant. So kudos to this damn movie for getting out an extremely important message and depiction of what is happening in their country right now. And they sidestepped a couple of landmines as well, like the mom, the woman that the guy is divorcing, and it's not pretty. Like, they could have very easily painted her as the bitch or the villain or the evil one, but they actually turn her into a very 3-dimensional portrait of a human fucking being, right? Who is definitely not perfect, but is trying. And that's kind of one of the themes of this movie, is that nobody is perfect, but we are all ultimately trying to be the best that we can be and do the best that we possibly can. And the relationship between the 2 guys, between the exes, and one just comes out of nowhere and kind of drops all this stuff on this ex's doorstep. And of course, you get glimpses into their previous relationship and all the feelings that are tangled up there. And they have such lovely chemistry. They have such a great bond, and it's so sweetly and honestly portrayed. It was a little slow in spots. It kind of dragged a little bit here and there. It probably didn't need to be quite as long as it was, but the story they told was so terrific and so important. And it's just this wonderful little drama about a very important subject that really looks at it from all 3 sides from a human standpoint. And it has the cutest fucking little girl I have ever seen in my whole ass life. I am in love with her. If nobody wound up wanting custody of her, I would have taken her in myself. As much as I go on about genre queerness, every now and then there is a contemporary queer show or movie that hits the right spot. And I think his is definitely one of those. Highly recommended. Because of You is a Taiwanese action drama series about 3 very, very rich half-brothers tracking down a surprise 4th half-brother and possible heir. Oh, bruh, this is my speed. You have just enough action-y plot stuff happening, but you also have just a bit of ridiculousness. Like, the actual conceit of the plot is fairly ridiculous, especially when you realize that all 3 of these half-brothers each have their own romantic arc. So, like, this is the type of reality that we're asked to accept, and it's so unapologetically itself that, like, I'm kind of on board. There's a plot outside of the romance to keep things going and keep things interesting. There's enough character development to keep everything feeling very rewarding. And the main couple is fantastic. It's one of the half-brothers, and then that fourth guy that they're tracking down, who might be another half-brother. Written for me, okay. There are so many great, fun, you wouldn't think you'd be down with this, but you are, things about it. My only problem is that in the second half of the series, things start to get a bit rushed, particularly with the main couple. And so by the end, when you have all of these really big feelings flying around and levels of devotion and outpouring of emotions, I just couldn't quite buy it as much as I absolutely wanted to. I feel like if they had a few extra episodes, just a little bit more time and a little bit more focus on really getting those last few steps into place, this would have been a 5 stars. Absolutely. But as it is now, it did kind of stumble its last few steps, and I only kind of cared about the secondary romances going on. But it was still a good time, and I'll likely revisit it, and it wasn't like it really crashed and burned like Advance Bravely. It wasn't that kind of disaster. Like, it fumbled, but it didn't straight up fall on its face. And so I think that is a big factor as to why I will likely be revisiting this. This was a good time. 3 Will Be Free is a Thai action thriller series with strip clubs and gangs and 3 people who are caught up in just this wild, crazy series of events that they're all more or less tied into for various pretty solid reasons. I was so happy to find out that this show's queerness comes from an actual polyamorous relationship that develops between the 3 leads. Like, queer content and queer representation on the whole is in dire need of some certain specific things. And poly representation is like way up there. Plus it's genre, like very action-y feel. Like, I was so down for this series, and I was so happy that for the most part, it was exactly what I wanted it to be. Does this show have a fairly ridiculous plot? Absolutely. Do I give a shit when the OT3 is this compelling? Absolutely not. It has all the ingredients of a good poly relationship, okay? All 3 of them stand on their own as individual characters. They are each layered and compelling and important and explored. And when they come together as a trio, it's like they all have their roles within the trio, and they all have this great dynamic, and everything is very like layered, but it also makes sense, and it's just, everything is there. And then, of course, the last ingredient for a rather perfect poly setup is that each side of the triangle is equally strong. So in terms of a triangle, the relationship between these 2 points of the triangle are just as strong as the relationship between these 2 points is just as strong as the relationship between the bottom 2. Like, everything is just as locked in. And they did that. My one big complaint, though, is that by the end, one whole point on the triangle, one whole person, started to feel a bit third wheel-ish, and then the ending was kind of ambiguous, somewhat suggesting that they weren't really together as a threesome anymore, and that the one who was kind of third wheelie was kind of off on his own, or something. It wasn't really clear, and considering all the amazing buildup and plot and romance and all of that stuff, considering how everything builds up to a poly ending, and then they end on well, they're probably not, but maybe they are kind of ending? Not the best. Again, not the dumpster fire that was Advance Bravely, but still kind of a letdown. This was yet again one of those things where I feel like if it had finished really strong, it could have been a 5. I loved all 3 of the main characters. I loved their each individual dynamics and their giant dynamic when they came together. I loved this crazy, fun, action thriller plot that they were just rocketing themselves through. I was really on board for everything, and then they kind of messed up the landing a bit. But with so little good poly content out there, This is definitely still, I feel like, required viewing for people who are looking for polyamorous shows, content, what have you. Because even though the ending was kind of weirdly ambiguous, the journey there is just non-stop OT3 amazingness. Now we have talked about 32 shows total. There is one show left, and that is the only show that has gotten 5 stars from me. What Did You Eat Yesterday is a Japanese slice-of-life comedy series with an emphasis on food and domesticity between 2 long-term middle-aged partners. And this series, with its 1 season, with its 12 episodes, is absolutely fucking delightful. Slice of life is one of those genres that can be kind of hit and miss with me because sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's really engaging, and in a big way that comes down to personal preference, because when it comes to watching somebody's life play out in a more naturalistic way, there are going to be things that interest a person and things that don't. But this slice of life is slice of life in the best way. It may have a very naturalistic approach, but it's still highly engaging, and great actors hold your interest the whole time. I think what sets this slice of life apart and makes it more kind of universally riveting and interesting is the core issue that we're dealing with through this series, even though it's a comedy. Because Shiro, the lawyer, the more responsible one, the more reserved one, the more private one, that part of this couple is extremely closeted. And it is largely self-imposed. So he's living with his partner, and he's been living with his partner for a few years now. He's in his 40s. He's an established person, but he still high-key struggles with anybody knowing that he's gay and that him and his partner are together. And we see him throughout the series really battle and struggle with the shame that he feels in regards to his sexuality and what happens if anybody ever figures out his sexuality. And then on the flip side, you have Kenji, who of course is the more outgoing, kind of couldn't be in the closet if he tried type of guy. And he's in a long-term relationship, and his partner doesn't ever want to be even remotely perceived as gay ever. So Kenji struggles with absolutely loving Shiro so much, but also wanting to be recognized as the partner that he is, and wanting to help Shiro in any way that he can, but at the same time, it's a very familiar place for queer people who are in relationships with someone who is either closeted or still really dealing with their own internalized homophobia. It's a very specific kind of struggle, and Kenji really embodies that and personifies that in such a lovely way. Both of these actors are incredible, and their chemistry together is incredible. You are rooting for them the entire way. And then throughout their little life stories, Shiro loves to fucking cook. He's very frugal. He's very into saving money. And so he's into making the best food with what little he allows himself, right? Which, hello, metaphor. And so in the middle of all this interesting, funny, lovely, romantic, dramatic, compelling, queer life, you also have these great sequences of Japanese food. And the whole overall feeling is just like so cozy and yet not boring. It has this emotional depth to it. And I have virtually no complaints. Any complaints I have about this series are like real nitpicky, okay? They're not even worth mentioning. I don't even want to mention it because this series just makes my heart so full, and I get so invested with these two. They're so wonderful and understanding and vulnerable in their own ways. I mean, this series has charm, food, and a beautifully rendered, deep, relationship all working at its core. This is a 5 out of 5. This absolutely hit it out of the park. I think there's a sequel movie that comes out this year. I will absolutely be reacting to it. Holy shit. I'm so excited. Definitely now a big fan of this show. I am so happy it was recommended to me. I could not have had a better time experiencing this series. Whew. We are done. That is it. That was all 33. I hope you had fun. I hope you have a little list going of shows that you need to check out in the future. All of the 4 stars and of course the 5 stars can be found in links below. I figured if I was going to strongly recommend something, then I should probably have a direct way for you to, see it down in the description box. So that is where you will find those links. And yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you like. Have a wonderful day. And please remember to take care of yourself.